watching GunplayTV, and as usual, we got firearms content today now. It occurred to me recently, I was chatting with a buddy of mine, and he mentioned to me that it seems that, I've kind of got a good grasp of the basic mechanics when it comes to shooting, especially with the sidearm, right? And so I figured it'd be beneficial to bring some of that to the channel. Some of you may have found my channel at different levels in your shooting development, and even me, myself, constantly find myself evolving and elevating my game. And so I figured I would take a moment and share some of the tips that I've acquired over the past few years and share that with some of y'all. To kick things off, right, I think we'll all be at least loosely familiar with the rules, the 4 rules of firearm safety. I'll go ahead and roll those in on the screen. We won't bother with going through that. You can pause it and read it at your leisure. First thing I would say that's going to be important with a firearm is, consider the fact that they don't get up and move and shoot on their own, all right? And so your grip is going to be paramount and it's primary. It's going to be the first thing that touches the gun is that master grip or that dominant hand, all right? And so right now I've got a Staccato P. We are holstered, I will show. We are clear, nothing in that chamber, nothing in that magazine well, all right? So we are facing a safe direction. We are in a controlled range, and we'll use this as our demo gun for the day. Now, the first thing that I'll point out, this of course is a 1911 or a 2011. Different guns will have different architectures, different builds. However, I would say that this is a good analog for pretty much everything across the board, and we do have a striker fire pistol here today that we can use kind of as an analog as well. Now, the first thing that's going to be important, again, it's going to be that the purchase that you get with your dominant hand on that firearm, right? And the first thing, of course, is going to be what they call a master grip. Now, I don't want to grip this gun down here. Now, why is that, right? I've got a lot of negative space, a lot of empty space here that's not being utilized, and that could otherwise be good purchase on the firearm. So what I want to do is get as high and tight. You'll probably hear me say that at least a couple times throughout this video. I want to get high and tight on that grip underneath what they call the beaver tail. Now, different guns, again, different builds, they're going to have different levels of that beaver tail. But the idea is I want to get as high on that as I possibly can. In fact, you'll probably see as I grip the firearm, I've got skin pushing up around that. I'm very high, very tight on that grip. Now, different folks will tell you different things about your finger engagement. Should you squeeze more with your lower fingers, your upper fingers? What I want you to do is kind of grip that gun, not like you're trying to kill it, but more like you're giving it a firm and reassuring handshake, right? I'm not squeezing it to the point that my hand is shaking under muscle tension. Just a good solid grip to where that gun's not going anywhere, right? So that's going to be your dominant hand, your master grip. That's, of course, going to be the first step. Master grip out of the way, right? We've got one hand on the gun at this point. We're halfway there. The next hand, of course, your secondary or your support hand is going to come onto that firearm, and that's going to be very pivotal in your follow-up shots. Getting your left hand grip solid will make you a faster and more consistent shooter. And I tell people, frankly, 80% of shooting, at least in my opinion, is going to be in your grip and in your trigger pull, which we'll get to here in a second. Now, again, that secondary or support hand is going to come and it's going to meet that primary, that dominant hand. Now, there's different ways that you can approach this. What I like to do is simply take my fingers and line them up in the grooves created by my dominant hand. So you're going to take that hand, you're going to come in and do your best to align them. It's not going to be crucial that you do that, but you do want to have a good purchase on that firearm. Now, this is where I find a lot of people go wrong. You'll see old movies with what they call now the teacup grip, right? We're holding the gun down here. This doesn't give us any type of recoil control. But what I instead want you to do is take that secondary support hand, line it up, and I really want you to focus on lining those fingers up and getting a solid purchase. Now, this is where, again, it's going to get a little bit more advanced and more conscious thinking for you to do this under live fire. What you're going to want to do is line those fingers up, and I want you to imagine that you are pointing both thumbs at your target. And this is what they call a thumbs forward grip for that reason, right? And so my thumbs aren't like this. Again, this is certainly better than the teacup grip, but both of my thumbs are very much forward. In fact, I like to tell people I almost keep my support hand thumb parallel with the slide, right? Not like this, but like this. Now, it's going to feel a little awkward at first. Don't be alarmed. It's not going to hurt you, but you will have to kind of build that into your muscle memory. So take that support hand, thumbs forward grip, and as you do that, right, you've got the architecture down. Now we get to the technicals and what you're actually doing when you're squeezing this gun under live fire. Thumbs forward grip, what I want you to do is press in to the gun with that support hand. You can see my muscles tense as I do that. You'll probably see it under live fire here in a second. But also, as I'm pressing in, I am kind of canting my wrist forward. I'm sure some of y'all remember that game that we used to play as kids, where you take your buddy's hand like you're shaking his hand and you're trying to twist his wrist into his body. That's essentially what I'm doing with the firearm, right? I'm pressing in and I'm pressing forward. Now, on the surface, that's all there is to it with the grip, right? A good purchase with your master grip in your primary hand, and that support hand giving that inward and outward pressure, right? And that's gonna help as that gun is recoiling. All right, so grip out of the way. Of course, everybody grabs a firearm and wants to squeeze that trigger. First thing I would say about that is, right, we touched on the 4 rules of firearm safety earlier. You'll notice that every time I come out that holster, I pick this gun up to do a display or a walkthrough, that finger is high and tight, once again, using that turn there on the side, right? And so that's gonna be paramount. Your trigger discipline is just as important. In fact, I'd say more important than your trigger pull. Now that we got that out the way, we'll get to the good stuff, right? So of course, a staccato P, more of a competition heritage gun. And so this trigger is gonna be a little bit different in shape compared to a lot of your striker fired firearms, and the trigger pull is gonna be a bit lighter, right? That's why a lot of people like these guns. You can run them very fast, but the fundamentals remain, right? If you got poor fundamentals, I could give you the best in the world and you wouldn't know what to do with it, all right? So we're gonna get into trigger pull. This should be a quick section. But, so, again, we've got that high and tight grip. We've got our support hand sturdy and high on that gun. Again, that thumb facing forward, again, parallel with that slide. And as you punch out, right, again, you'll notice that as I shoot, I'll roll in some competition footage here. I always start from a compressed position. There's reasons for that, but ultimately I've trained it into my muscle memory. And so when I come to punch that gun out, not until that point is my finger moving to the trigger. Again, trigger discipline, very important here. So we don't want that finger in that trigger guard if we're pointing down as we talk, we're chit-chatting, we're turning around at the range, etc. Again, keep that finger off the trigger until we have punched out and we are acquiring a sight picture. Once you've got that, right, a lot of people new to guns, right, maybe the only thing that you've ever picked up is a water gun, a super soaker, or a BB gun. You're gonna probably inherently want to wrap your full finger around that trigger like this. That's not gonna be conducive to quick and accurate shooting, right? We want a very controlled surface and a very controlled point of contact with that trigger. And so you'll see myself do this often. You'll see other experienced shooters do this. The only piece that we're using is the tip, kind of the middle, that pad of that index finger. And so when I come onto that trigger, again, maintaining that grip the entire way, I'm only using the index or just the tab of that index finger. And as I pull, I'm not yanking it. I'm more so squeezing it, pressing it, if you will, right? I'm just slowly, and I tell new shooters, do this very slowly. At first, almost let the gun surprise you as you pull that trigger straight back. Focus on keeping that trigger coming back, or I'm sorry, that trigger finger coming straight back to you. If you can master that along with your grip, you'll become a much better shooter. Now, you'll also see people that are newer to shooting have a tendency to flinch or pull their shots low left. A lot of new shooters will say, hey, this gun shoots low left. That's not the case. The gun is always, and maybe not a high point, but the gun is for the most part always going to be more accurate than the shooter. And again, that's just a joke. Even the high point is going to be more accurate than the shooter, right? So the reason that you'll see shooters pull their shots low left or low right if they are left-handed is because oftentimes as you squeeze that trigger, it's going to be it's a very conscious action that you have to drill into your muscle memory. Reason being is because we want that trigger pull to impart no change in direction, you know, from or with our sights. I don't want to pull the trigger and pull my gun downwards. Again, that's going to cause you to shoot off target. So trigger control, again, is going to be about a consistent pull back on that trigger as well as isolating your index finger from the rest of your hand. You don't want to squeeze to the point that the gun is moving off target, right? And so again, consistent and steady contact with the point of that index finger, pulling that straight back while trying to isolate the motion of this finger from the rest of your hand. Sympathetic squeeze is a real thing. You know, your hand, all your muscles are connected in one way or another. You you've got to really train that to be able to keep your shots directly on target, especially under pressure. All right, so the last component that we're going to touch on today, of course, shooting is a very dynamic activity you're going to learn over time. But the last component that I want to touch on, of course, is going to be a sight picture. Now, I've saved this for last. It's certainly paramount to actually hitting. What you're aiming at is having a good point of aim. But again, I think making you a good shooter, a fast shooter, and an accurate shooter comes down, of course, to all three of these things, right? Your grip, your trigger pull, and your sight picture. And so, to round it off, sight picture, right? And so, we'll notice right off the top, I do have an optic, a red dot on this particular pistol. That's going to kind of change the dynamics a bit, all right? And so if you're a new shooter watching this and you're eager to kind of kit out your equipment, you want to get the new RMR, what I would tell you is learn to shoot with irons first. Now, this particular pistol has what they call suppressor height sights. They sit a bit higher, and so I'm actually able to use the iron sights through the optic in the event that for whatever reason this died on me, right? But we will take a look at a striker fired pistol here in a second with a more traditional iron sight setup. But to display, what I would say is, again, keeping in mind the first two components, right? Our fingers off the trigger until it's go time. We're starting from compressed and we are punching out, right? And once we've punched out, all right, so before you get out there and you hit the range, of course, if you're a new shooter, this is especially important for you. You're gonna have to determine which eye is your dominant eye. All right, and so there's a quick way that you can do this at home. This is what I've always done. Pick a small item on the wall, maybe a clock, light switch, a photo frame, if you will, and kind of take your thumb, both eyes open at this time, take your thumb and cover that, whatever that item is, in your point of view, right? Cover that up, and at this point, your light switch can no longer be seen. It's behind your thumb. Now, what you're gonna do to determine which eye is dominant is you're going to interchange closing both of your eyes, right? Or I should say either of your eyes. So I'm going to cover that up, and I'm going to first close my right eye. I've closed my right eye, and I see that that object is no longer covered. That tells me that, frankly, my right eye is my dominant eye. I've only got my left eye open, and the piece that I was looking to cover is no longer occluded by my thumb. Now, you can confirm this by switching, right? Closing your left eye, and I can see that that object is still covered with my right eye as I close, right? So now that you know which eye is your dominant eye, you're gonna try to make sure that, of course, you're aligned behind that, right? You wanna picture a straight line from your eye through the sights, and again, you wanna align those three posts. I'll roll in some pictures here. But again, this is where you will actually be able to see the impact of the grip and the trigger pull that we touched on earlier. My grip, as I begin to shoot under live fire, will help that gun to return to zero for the most part, right? If you've got your grip right, that gun under recoil, of course, is gonna rock, but if your grip and that inward and outward pressure with that left hand, if you've got that in place and if you got it locked down, that gun's gonna bounce, but it should, for the most part, return to just where you were holding it before you broke the trigger. Again, this is why it's gonna make you a faster shooter. You're also gonna see the impact of your trigger pull here, right? If for whatever reason you are pulling that gun too much, you're gonna see that front sight dip out of view. An optic will actually make it even easier to identify the flaws in the first two components that we went through in the video, right? The grip and the trigger pull. But again, the idea is to keep that aligned through until after your shot, right? And again, this is where that trigger pull is gonna come back into play. I've got a good grip, but I want to try to pull that trigger in a way that will not impart a change on my sight picture, right? If I squeeze that too hard, if I've got too much finger wrapped around it, it's a bit harder to control. So that's why I say use just the tip of that finger. In practice, you can do this at home, dry fire, of course, make sure that your gun is empty. In fact, actually, you know what, let's take a look at a more traditional striker fired setup. Actually, I'm gonna have my cameraman hand me what he's rocking with. So we've got a pretty standard SIG P320 here. Of course, we are safe and empty, right? So we're good in that regard. But again, we'll see that there's no optic on this particular pistol, right? Just a set of aftermarket irons. Now, again, the idea here is to line up all three of those posts, right? Kind of nestle the center dot between the far two. I'll roll in some video of that now. But again, this will carry you through between different sidearm types, right? If your grip and your trigger pull and sight picture are down, I can more or less hand you anything. And after a few practice reps, you'll be lined up behind that dot. And if you're gripped again and trigger pull it right, you'll be pinging that steel every time, all right? All right, so a quick, extra piece of content, extra piece of advice here, right? If you are a new shooter and again, you're kitting out your equipment, you really want to get that red dot, I would just say, it's going to be imperative that you practice with both irons and a red dot. Red dots can make it just a little bit harder because if your presentation, that firearm is not coming out and it's completely on plane directly with your eye, you're going to end up having to hunt around for that dot. Right now, a quick tip if you are finding yourself in this position, use your irons, right? If you can focus on that front sight and lining it up with your rear sight, as they come into alignment, you'll find that your red dot is also in that window. Reason being, of course, is because if you zeroed your red dot, it should be on with your irons. Right now, one last point that I would make, when you are using irons, common knowledge and common instruction is to focus on your front sight. Put that over your target and look at the front sight. Your target should appear slightly blurry beyond that front sight. Now, this is where red dots shine. That's not necessarily the case with the red dot. I can look directly through at my target and juxtapose that red dot on top, and point of focus is downrange at what I'm shooting at. So again, keep that in mind. But if you ever find yourself hunting for that red dot, remember you can always use that front sight once again to find it. All right, so again, just 3 topics today on how to make yourself a more proficient and accurate and faster, frankly, shooter. Now, there's a lot to it, and we'll probably do a part 2 to the series at some point, but I hope that the topics that we went through today have helped you to kind of hone your skills. I'm constantly still developing and evolving on these same 3 points, and so I'm sure that I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly evolving, but in my 5 years and some odd change shooting, I would say that these 3 things are certainly the first that I would focus on. So again, if you've made it this far in the video for whatever reason and haven't already subscribed, I'd ask that you go ahead and do that now. And of course, if you'd be so kind, please go ahead and hit that like button. It really does help to push through the anti-2A algorithm. But again, if you made it this far in the video, I certainly appreciate you. With all that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and get up out of here. I'm gone.